right here? Okay.
Could you just state your name for the camera, please?
Hello, my name is Kyle Scott, and I am a shipper. So, I've been rewatching Naruto, as I sometimes do, and despite giving many other characters the chance, my favourite character in the entire series is still Hinata Hyuga. And let me tell you, that's rough on me, man. Having your favourite character be a secondary supporting character feels a bit like being a Dickensian orphan begging for table scraps behind the restaurant. Please, Mr. Kishimoto, can I have just one more scene with them? On that front, I'm just glad that my favourite character isn't like 10-10, because at least Hinata eventually has the dubious honour of being the main character's love interest. It's also rough because, somehow, Hinata is one of the most controversial characters in the core cast. Some people love her, some people absolutely despise her, and then a lot of other people are like, oh, you know, she's fine, but she could have been better. But the internet being what it is, the most extreme voices are always the ones that make themselves the most heard. Normally, I wouldn't consider this a real issue, not to toot my own horn or anything, but I'm generally pretty good at cutting through that kind of fandom nonsense and just talking about the actual thing. But I'm kind of struggling to do that this time because apparently I've become personally invested in defending this fictional character from what I see are a bunch of unjustified or completely wrong claims, which is a little bit embarrassing to admit. I think specifically there's a line of attack from a certain kind of anti-Hinata fan on the darker sides of Tumblr, which, trust me, do exist, that goes, fanboys only like Hinata because she has big boobs, which is just such a deeply personal insult. I couldn't possibly find the character's personality endearing or genuinely engage with their personal story and struggle. No, I'm just a creep. There's a lot of perfectly valid and even important to talk about problems with the way this character is written and portrayed, but the well of discourse is so thoroughly poisoned that it makes me want to immediately go on the offensive. What's wrong at Becky357? You still better than Naruto didn't end up with Sakura? Well, guess what, Becky? I won, and all you can do is sulk and throw petty insults. That's my instinctual response, is to meet fire with fire and get really petty, but obviously that's not a very productive thing to do, now is it? It's just that some of the arguments against Hinata are so completely overblown that I feel like we're not even watching the same show. Like, people will unironically argue that she's a slave owner, which is just such a massive twisting of the actual things in the series that it makes me feel like we didn't even watch the same show. There's a lot going on here. There's a lot of subtext to the argument Hinata Hyuga is a slave owner that's going to take some time to unpack. And as much as I would like for this to be a normal video where I just analyse a character, I don't think I can do that, because she's more than just a character to me. Growing up, reading this strange backwards book that my friends introduced to me, Hinata was my hero. Wow, I just admitted that on camera. I guess we're doing this.
Could you tell me a little bit about what that means?
Shipping? Sure, okay. Shipping is a particular kind of fandom where people romantically want two characters to get together. This can come in many different forms. Fan fiction, fan art, AMVs, which are a sort of romantic themed music video. It can also be expressed by analysing pieces of media, looking for clues that two characters like each other. But generally it's just the desire to see two characters get together in a romantic relationship, usually centred in media that's not explicitly about romance. I suppose I should explain what's going on if you're still watching this video having never watched or read Naruto before. Hinata is one of the main supporting cast of Naruto, part of the Leaf 12, I guess is the best name for them, the group of kids that as the show goes on become Naruto's core friend group. She's a member of the main family of the Hyuga clan, one of the most prestigious families in the village because of their special eyes, the Byakugan, which is this sort of magic super seeing eye that gives you almost 360-degree vision and a bunch of other stuff you'd expect, I don't know, Sam Fisher's goggles to give you, like X-ray vision and infrared vision. She used to be the heiress to the clan, but she was kicked out of that position by her dad because she sucks at fighting and can't even beat her 7-year-old sister. As for her personality, well, to quote the big man himself, a world-class freak who won't even look me in the eye, a shy little brunette. He's a real poet, that Naruto. Hinata's deal is that she's shy, although personally I think based on what we see that's actually a massive understatement, but we'll go with it for now. She's shy and she has a crush on Naruto. Her arc across the series is that she wants to be braver and stronger, and she views Naruto as an inspiration for that goal. Eventually, she's able to overcome her self-doubt, declare her love for Naruto, and in the end she and Naruto get married. That's a massive oversimplification, and you're probably wondering where the slave ownership comes in, but we'll get into the details in a bit. That's just a rough overview. Hinata falls into a particular trope of Japanese characters called the Dandere, or the Shrinking Violet. There are a few names for this trope. A character who is primarily driven by shyness and awkwardness, but with an undercurrent of kindness, and usually also romantic interest, in this case Hinata's crush on Naruto. The trope's not exclusive to girls, but they usually are girls, and I'm not using that as a synonym for women. The trope is mostly applied to children and teenagers. It's also not exclusive to Japanese media, but it is a lot rarer to see this kind of character in Western media because, generally speaking, shyness is actually a really hard thing to make into a likeable personality trait.
Hey, Hinata, can I ask you something? Why would you want to show me your answers?
Why? Well, just because... Well, you see...
Speaking as an introvert, it's pretty clear to see that our entertainment is dominated by extroverts, and there's a good reason for that. In order to make a character likeable and understandable, the audience needs to be able to get to know them, and introverts, especially shy people, are harder to get to know by their very nature. It's really hard to showcase a character's personality, ambitions, and quirks if they can't talk to other people properly and explain and showcase those things. And so generally speaking, Hollywood is a land devoid of social anxiety disorders. We'll sometimes get Hollywood shy, like Bruce Banner in the Avengers movies, but there's a big difference between Bruce being a bit awkward around Natasha and Hinata literally fainting when Naruto gets too up in her face. Storytelling requires action, and shyness, by its very nature, is about inaction. It's not a coincidence that one of the most common criticisms of Hinata is that she doesn't do anything and is too passive. Okay, I want to take a second to make a confession because it's kind of important to understand where I'm coming from in this video. I am not super familiar with Japanese media. I've watched Naruto and a handful of other anime, but I'm not really an anime fan, which might be shocking considering my entire vibe. What I'm really describing here is a cultural clash. It's a more popular trope in Japan because Japan is just generally a more introverted culture. Whereas most of my entertainment comes from America, the most extroverted culture that there is. In Japan, shyness is considered an endearing quality, while in America, a little bit of shyness is considered cute, but eventually people will start to get annoyed at you if you don't learn how to speak properly. For example, if I started doing the whole video like this, you would probably stop watching pretty quickly. This is the depressing irony of social anxiety. You're so worried that people won't like you that you fumble over all of your words, and the result is that people don't like you, or at the very least don't enjoy talking to you. And I think it's worth really digging into what we're actually talking about here, because I don't think Hinata is shy, at least not at the start of the series. I think she has a crippling social anxiety disorder, and that's actually really hard to make into an endearing character trait.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think shipping is more prevalent in non-romantic genres?
It's an interesting question. I think, from my own experience, if I had to guess, it would be because people are looking for something that the original media is not necessarily giving them. Like, if you go into a rom-com, then you know you're going to get romance. That's what the whole thing is. But in something like Naruto, where it's not a central part of the narrative, people want that to be a thing because you spend a lot of time with these characters, and it's a pretty natural thing, I would say, to want people to experience romance, because that's a natural part of life, and if it's missing from a story, people will inject it into the story. Tropes, like the Dandere, are useful for making generalizations and observations across a wide range of media, but in terms of individual analysis, they're actually completely useless. Generally speaking, a writer doesn't set out to make a trope. The name is applied to the character after the fact based on a series of criteria that they appear to meet, but no character will perfectly embody the trope, because that's impossible. Dandere is just a generalized term across 100 different characters, not a formula. Hinata fits the label in the broad strokes, but just like any characters, there are particulars to her story that are ultimately more important to talk about. The portrayal of Hinata's shyness is more than just being a bit awkward around the boy she fancies. It's a debilitating condition that impedes her ability to function in society. That's the fundamental difference between a person who's shy and a person who's got an anxiety disorder. Anxiety is a natural human emotion, and like every emotion we have, it's got a purpose. It warns us of potential dangers. With regular shyness, that danger is something like social embarrassment. For example, being nervous before giving a class presentation. There is potential to mess it up, have people laugh at you or stumble over your words at a bad time. That's a sort of social danger. Feeling a bit shy before giving a presentation is a completely normal experience that I think most people, except the most confident among us, have had before. An anxiety disorder takes those feelings and amplifies them tenfold, to the point where they become unworkable. You'll worry about giving that presentation for weeks ahead of time and try to come up with any excuses you can not to have to give it. And when you eventually do have to give it, you'll be sweating buckets and barely able to get the words out in the first place. Some level of anxiety is rational, but that level of anxiety is a genuine problem that can make it hard to function properly, because it impairs your ability to do the normal everyday things that you need to do in daily life. It can make it feel impossible to ask someone for directions, or even to buy something at a checkout counter, because that means interacting with a stranger, and strangers are scary. Hinata fits every definition of a social anxiety disorder. This is illustrated several times in the series and expanded on in the anime. We're told by Kurenai, her sensei, that because of her self-doubt, she continually messes up on her missions. When she's put in a fight against her cousin Neji, he's almost immediately able to paralyze her and nearly give her a panic attack just by talking to her and exploiting her self-doubt and self-hatred. As an even smaller child, we see this manifested as an almost complete inability to speak to anyone at all. It's a big part of what her father perceives as her weakness. It's not just that she's less talented than her sister, she doesn't have the fortitude to lead a clan. Being kicked out by her dad after failing his rigorous training regime only worsened this condition by effectively validating her lack of self-worth. Like a lot of characters in Naruto, her childhood is supposed to be somewhat of a parallel to Naruto himself. They both grew up isolated and alone. Hinata has a family, sure, but, well, they suck. They suck real bad. Just like Naruto, we're never shown Hinata having any friends before the series begins, not even the other girls in their year. She's not a part of the friend group. The anime expands that even her own sister, who used to treat her with love when they were very young, basically stopped talking to her entirely after she realised how weak she was. More than that, Naruto and Hinata are both failures. Naruto flunked the graduation test 3 times, and Hinata was kicked out of her position in the Hyuga clan. The difference is in how each of them reacted to their circumstances. Hinata withdrew into herself and gave in to despair, but Naruto, in his shonen protagonist way, never gives up. He fights no matter what, and that's why we love him. That's why Hinata admires him. It's not just because she has a crush on him, the crush came later. It's because he's the kind of person that she wants to be. Someone who believes in themselves and doesn't give up even in the face of continual failure and ridicule. And since the Naruto-verse is a world where therapy is a forbidden technique known only to Naruto, any self-improvement has to come from within. And let me tell you, that's hard as hell. Yeah. So you've probably figured this out by now, but I had some pretty bad social anxiety myself when I was a kid. I was the kid sitting at the back of the class, hiding behind my hair and hoping to God that no strangers would come up and talk to me, or worse than that, any girls. I wasn't admittedly quite as bad as Hinata. I did have some friends I could talk to, and they brought me out of my shell, I guess you could say. But all that stuff about anxiety before, not being able to talk to shop clerks and all that, yeah, that was personal experience. I had long hair because I like having long hair, sure, but it's also because I absolutely despise getting my hair cut. Having to sit in a chair for an hour staring at my own reflection while someone touches me and makes small talk about the classes I'm taking, I couldn't stand it. I hope to God that doesn't come across anymore. I mean, I'm still an introvert, and to be honest, I still find haircuts pretty awkward. But the shaking and the uncontrollable fear, those are gone now. I can handle a bit of small talk. Bit. But this isn't something that I just grew out of. People used to say that I would grow out of it, and I hoped that I would, but I never did. To actually overcome this, I had to put in a lot of that work myself. I did the therapy thing, but even therapy is only really there to give you the methods of improvement. You still have to put in all the work yourself. I had to force myself to look people in the eye when I talked to them. I had to force myself to go up to strangers and make small talk, and all of it sucked. But I knew that I had to do it because if I didn't, I never was going to do it, and I was going to be stuck in that social anxiety spiral forever. Even now, that process is still ongoing. There's still some things like eye contact that I could be better at, and a part of it too is this YouTube channel. I do this because I enjoy doing it, sure, but the reason I started doing it when I did was a deliberate effort on my part to increase my own confidence. Doing this for years has done wonders for my speaking ability, because even if we're not talking face to face right now, I am talking to you. I am aware that you are listening to the things I say right now, and that means that I have to speak clearly. I have to project a level of confidence and charisma. Doing this for years has done wonders for my speaking ability in the real world. So the reason I specified earlier that I'm not super familiar with Japanese media is that when I first watched Naruto when I was 11 or 12, I had never seen a character like Hinata before, a character that so perfectly captured my own fears and anxieties. So watching her overcome that and work to improve herself was so deeply inspirational to me, because I knew firsthand how freaking hard that was. How hard it can feel to go outside of your comfort zone. You'll feel like you're about to pass out just to talk to someone in the street. And if she could manage all that, maybe I could too. Naruto's nindo, his ninja way, is that he never quits, he never runs, and he never goes back on his word. He repeats this very often throughout the series, usually with a big confident smile on his face, because that's just who he is.
Don't underestimate me! I don't quit and I don't run! You can act tough all you want! You guys aren't gonna scare me off! No way!
Hinata decides to adopt that ninja way too, except when she says it, I know how much harder it is for her to say it, how hard it is to even get the words out. And because it's so much harder, I find it so much more inspirational when she says it than when he does.
I never go back.
Hinata!
On my word.
Anyway, shall we talk about the slavery? When did I first realise I was a shipper? Well, it would have been about 14 years ago at this point when I first started getting into Naruto. The Pain Invasion arc was airing in Japan when I first got into it, so I think that was around 2010. And I became particularly invested in the character of Hinata, so her goals became my goals. I wanted her to get together with Naruto. Naruhina it's called, and because it was the Pain arc, the love confession had just happened, and that was a big deal in the shipping community, let me tell you.
私はナルト君が大好きだから。
I didn't really use Tumblr at the time, but I was a DeviantArt kid, and I would spend a lot of time browsing the Naruhina tag on DeviantArt, looking at fan art, and I remember there was a fan comic or a doujinshi about Naruto and Hinata. There was a sort of alternate timeline thing where they got together after the Pain arc, and I'm sure for a while I was more invested in that than the actual ongoing story of Naruto itself. Aside from her anxiety and her crush on Naruto, the other side of Hinata's character that's most important is her family drama, primarily centred around her cousin Neji. In every way, Neji is pretty much the opposite of Hinata. He's cold, mean, and a natural prodigy, generally considered by everyone to be the best Byakugan user in the clan. And he absolutely despises the main family for their cruelty and caste system. When they're matched against each other in the training exams, he takes that frustration out on her and very nearly kills her, after the previously alluded to psychological torture, that is. Unlike Hinata, Neji belongs to one of the Hyuga's branch families, which have been historically oppressed by the main family, and worse yet, branded with a curse mark, which when activated causes them immense pain if they should ever misbehave against the main family. Neji got his when he was 4. Is it fair to call this system slavery? I would say yes, it probably is. It's complicated by the family connections a little, but it's obviously a completely cruel and unjustified thing to do. So there you go, Hinata is of the main branch, who have slaves, therefore Hinata is a slave owner. Only I feel like we're making a few leaps in logic here, aren't we? First of all, Hinata is a child with no control over who's raising her, and based on her everything, I don't get the sense that she's particularly fond of this system either. But being 12, she's not exactly in a position to do anything about it, especially since her dad disowned her.
She is your firstborn and heir to your household. The life of a genin can be dangerous and brief.
Do what you will. She's of less worth than her sister, 5 years her junior. The Hyuga clan has no use for such an heir.
Secondly, this is just the way things are set up at the start of the series. After Naruto's big fight with Neji, Hinata's dad has a big change of heart seeing the suffering he's put Neji through, and he starts to put an end to the system. He starts training Neji personally, despite him being a branch family member and that formerly being forbidden. And he seemingly reconnects with his daughter as well. Neji and Hinata also reconcile their differences, and while they're technically cousins, she refers to and loves him like a brother, and he clearly does the same for her. She never views him as inferior or as her slave. So, by the time Hinata is old enough and strong enough to try and do something about this, the situation has already resolved itself. There is never a time in the series at any point when Hinata is actively choosing to be a slave owner. In fact, her own dad gives her half the credit for putting an end to the system.
But no such fate exists. Your very own son has been fighting hard to demonstrate just that. And my daughter has too. The branch family doesn't live to protect and serve the main family anymore. We protect each other as equals now.
Okay, what are we doing? Wasn't this video being all sincere and embarrassing earlier? Why am I now debunking claims about slave ownership? Because the thing with this is, it's actually pretty close to a critique I would make of the show myself, which is that after part 1, the Hyuga clan become pretty much irrelevant to the entire story, even when it becomes increasingly obvious that they should be a bigger deal. Like, the main big bad boss of the entire series has the Byakugan. But the story of Neji and Hinata working together to bring together the main and branch families is a story that happens completely off screen. If they made a spin-off book about it, I'd read it, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. It's left almost completely inferred in the main story, and there's so many plot threads going on towards the end of the series that I understand why Kishimoto didn't focus on it, but that lack of focus has led some people to believe that it didn't happen at all, or at least they'll pretend it didn't happen for the sake of arguments. I wish we didn't have to talk about this. But we do, because there's no online war that claims lives quite like the waifu wars. WatchMojo.com ranks Sakura versus Hinata as the number 4 most heated waifu war in history. I'm sure as hell glad I don't know who the number 1s are. There's a faction of the Naruto fanbase that pits these two characters against each other to a comically cruel degree. Much like how a lot of these things go, it becomes less about how much you like your character and how much you actively despise the other character. Anti-fans. That's how we get to Hinata is a slave owner. It's by actively looking for reasons to hate this character. And nothing sells hatred like moral justification. It's how we also get she's a horrible selfish person, or she's a stalker, or she brainwashed Naruto into loving her, or the classic, people only like her because of her boobs. I don't particularly want to spend time debunking all of these. I figured slave owner was probably the worst accusation in all of these, but just understand that these are all based on extremely uncharitable readings of the text, and also just ignoring things that contradict it. And don't worry, I will absolutely both sides of this issue, because anti-Sakura fans have gone on some bullshit as well, but this video is about Hinata, and I do actually want it to end eventually, believe it or not. Why these two characters? Well, the only possible reason is because they're both the prime candidates, I guess, for Naruto's love interest, because otherwise they have basically nothing in common. But that doesn't matter anymore, really, because we get to a point where we're not even talking about these characters anymore. We're talking about versions of these characters that are so extruded from their actual personification that we may as well be talking about, like, Satan. Worst character ever, ruined the entire series. Hinata fans are slavery apologists, Sakura fans are abuse apologists. I think it's clear by now why this bothers me so much. It's because any discussion about either of these characters eventually becomes this. Someone will start it will escalate, and it will all turn into a big fiery mess. And that's really annoying. It's one of the several reasons why I was so nervous to make this video despite this character being so personally important to me. Some people are going to tell me that I am a horrible, immoral person for liking this cartoon drawing. It also makes trying to do actual criticism difficult because if you do that, you will be perceived as an enemy by your side. And then you've got both the anti-Sakuras and the anti-Hinatas telling you that you're a horrible, horrible person. It's a mess. Like, I agree, it does kind of suck that Neji's story is completely subsumed by Hinata's story, and how he ends up dying to save her in exactly the same way his dad died for his uncle, and that's supposed to be poetic or something. It has undertones that I don't love. Also, Hiyashi, my dude, if the main and branch families are equal now, then why the hell does Neji still have a curse mark on his forehead? What's going on there, man? But when I say that, I'm not saying Neji was forced to sacrifice himself for the honour of Hinata, princess of the slavist Hyuga family. Fuck that selfish bitch. Because that's just bad media literacy. It's not what's happening in the scene. Neji acted of his own free will to save his family and his friend. No one forced him to do anything. I think that the series giving Hiyashi Hyuga a warm streak and revealing that he's not the abusive asshole he's initially presented as is a bad choice. Let him be a dick, it works better for the story. But when I say that, I'm not saying Hinata wasn't even abused. She had a perfect pampered little childhood. She's just a faker for attention. Because that's so obviously not true. And around it goes again and again. It's especially difficult when we get to what I would argue is the most important analysis for these characters, which is a feminist analysis. These are both significant female characters in a male-dominated genre in a story written by a man. It's absolutely important to analyse them through a feminist lens, and I think there's a lot of interesting critique and discussion that can be drawn from that. But Tumblr arguments need a moral high ground, so it's not just that they hate the other character, their character becomes the peak of feminist writing, and the opposing side becomes the absolute worst insult to women that Japan has ever seen. And obviously, neither of those is true for either characters, and talking in that way is completely unproductive. I really don't like getting bogged down in this kind of petty fandom drama, but in this case, in the course of my regular internet browsing, it feels completely inescapable. And I know that I don't need to spend time debunking this. I know that most fans don't genuinely believe in this sort of thing. I know that! Naruto used to do these character popularity polls, and Hinata would always do well in them. She peaked at number 6 and almost always made the top 10. She's a fairly popular character. But the internet has this blurring effect, where every single opinion and every single argument is presented with equal importance. Like, if I say something stupid in a room full of 1,000 people, then nobody's going to hear me, and the people that do will look at me and go, "Oh, that's a stupid person." But if you do it on Twitter, it just joins the endless scroll and is presented with equal importance as everything else on the scroll. And for some reason, I feel the need to defend this fictional character from bullies. Am I white-knighting this fucking pencil drawing?
If you don't mind me saying so, you seem a little embarrassed to talk about this.
Do I? I mean, it's kind of embarrassing, right? I mean, shippers have a bit of a reputation online for being rude and mean and really belligerent when things don't go their way. Sarah Z has a good video about that.
You're changing the subject. What are you not saying?
I'm not sure what you mean by that. Hey, there's a little bit of a tangent I want to make here because it's kind of an important concept to understand. You've probably noticed from the clips I've used so far that I primarily watch the show in English, a controversial decision I know, but also in this case kind of annoying for me personally. You see, for our purposes, there's actually 4 different versions of Naruto. There's more, but you're on English YouTube, so I assume you don't care much about the French dub. Je suis désolé. The 4 versions that matter to us are the original manga, the English translation of the manga, the Japanese anime, and then the English dub of the anime. Now, in the broad strokes, this isn't a huge deal because it's still the same story, right? Well, except for anime filler, but that's a different conversation. It's all just retellings of the same fundamental story. Well, it's not that simple, because while the overall story is the same, every single scene between these 4 different versions is going to have different dialogue, which can change the delivery or the tone of certain scenes in pretty fundamental ways sometimes. For example, Naruto's first impression of Hinata, which I read earlier, a world-class freak who won't even look me in the eye, that's from this, the English translation of the manga. But the anime dub version of that scene is actually quite substantially different.
Hinata Hyuga, She's okay, but I don't know why she gets all shy and embarrassed every time I even, look at her. It's kinda weird.
The context for that introduction is almost completely different, right? Instead of the focus being on how weird Naruto thinks she is, now the focus is on Naruto's own oblivious as to why she's always so awkward around him. Here's another one.
ヒューガひなた。俺が見ると目を背ける変なやつ。暗くて恥ずかしがりやな、女の子。
That one is closer to the original English translation, but it's still different. It's a softer introduction than World Class Freak. I assume the original Japanese is different again, but unfortunately, I can't tell because I can't read Japanese. Still, it begs an important question, which is, which version of Naruto should we be talking about? The obvious answer is obviously the original manga, but unfortunately, I literally can't do that because I can't read it. So then, this, right? Well, which version of this? Because through various publications over the years, there's multiple different versions of the English translation. And translation itself fundamentally changes the core text. It has to, because there's certain words that don't have direct translations, or don't meet English syntax, or don't have the cultural context you need for English readers to understand. It's a fundamentally different thing. Like Naruto's catchphrase, Detabayo, it has no meaning in English because it barely has meaning in Japanese. So the English subtitles for the anime just leave it as is. However, I think that's silly because it doesn't mean anything to me. If you speak Japanese, then you can kind of put together what it's supposed to mean. Like if I said to you something was interscrangeable, that's not a real word, but you can kind of put together from the sounds of other words what I might be trying to say. The English anime dub translates it to believe it, which doesn't necessarily mean the same thing, but it conveys the same idea. It's a sort of self-affirmation in a show-offy way. These kinds of changes are absolutely necessary when you're doing an English dub because you're trying to sell the show to English-speaking audiences. But it's also why we always end up in this constant subs versus dubs debate, because you are fundamentally watching something different. Now, ideally, my response to this problem would be that we should simply consider all the versions in our analysis. I'm a completionist like that. But obviously that's not a very practical approach. So the better option is that you just have to always specify which version of Naruto you're talking about. But obviously no one on the internet actually does that because it would be a tremendous pain in the ass to have to specify that every single time you want to have a discussion. That does mean though that very often in online discussions, people will be having conversations about two different versions of the same character without even realising it, which just adds fuel to the fire of that whole endless debate problem now, doesn't it? Japanese Hinata and English Hinata are functionally different entities. I'm sure they get along great, but they have different ways of speaking and different ways of expressing themselves and a different voice entirely. Personally, I've always found arguments about canon to be completely unproductive and only pulled out in the realms of online debate when you want to nullify someone's evidence against you. Oh, well that doesn't count because it wasn't in the manga. Yes, very good. You got me. Here's a gold star. I sympathise with the desire to have one foundational version of Naruto that we can all talk about, but I also realise that that's practically impossible. Because, quite frankly, I can't watch the show in Japanese. My brain doesn't let me. I can't focus on subtitles and what's going on the screen at the same time. I'm sorry. Also, I can pick up on emotional inflections much better in English than I can in Japanese. So just be aware, unless I specify otherwise, that I am specifically talking about the English dub version of Naruto, because that does change things more substantially than I think a lot of people really realise.
Kyle, why did you come to me today? I can't help you if you don't tell me what's going on.
I don't know what's going on. I thought I was over this. I've never been shy about the things that I'm passionate about on this YouTube channel. I always make it a point of pride to talk about these things, but it feels different this time. I feel ashamed. I feel embarrassed to talk about this, and I don't know why. Why do I feel so embarrassed? I don't know if there's a phrase in media criticism more overused and less understood than strong female character, but whatever it means, most people seem to agree that Naruto doesn't have very many of them. The party line has always been that Kishimoto doesn't know how to write women, and that all of the female characters in the series deserved better, and to be fair, I don't entirely disagree. Women in Naruto, despite often trying to break the mold, generally fall into completely typical roles for women in this kind of show. There are support characters, both in terms of their relevance to the plot and in terms of what they actually do in fights. Which, being that this is a fighting anime, is pretty important. Sakura absolutely gets the brunt end of this because she's the most prevalent woman in the show, yet even with her super strength, she always ends up in the support role to Naruto and Sasuke. The story of almost every woman in Naruto ultimately ends up being centered on the men in her life, with which boy they end up with becoming the most pressing issue for each of their character arcs. And while we're not really talking about Boruto at all, the fact that pretty much all of them fall into the stereotypical gender roles of a married family, regardless of their previous personalities, is weird. It's weird. You're telling me that Choji wouldn't retire to become a full-time parent, but that Karui would? Karui. That's stupid. There's nothing wrong with being a stay-at-home mum, but when it goes against everything that a character used to stand for, it becomes a little bit jarring and uncomfortable. And naturally, when we get to this kind of criticism, Hinata bears a bigger brunt than anyone else. Here's the argument. Hinata's entire story, characterization, and motivations center only around Naruto. She doesn't have any goals beyond a relationship with him, and if she does, the story doesn't give them any focus at all. She's continually shown to lose every fight that she's a part of, despite her insistence that she's gotten stronger. Point of fact, she generally loses fights specifically so that Naruto can get really mad about it and serve as a motivation for his own big fight instead. And by the time of Boruto, she's given up being a ninja entirely to do all of the parenting while her workaholic husband neglects his family duties, still pretty much existing only to serve Naruto's whims and handle his emotions for him, as a traditional wife should. She's also, in contrast to Sakura, who's a bit of a tomboy, very traditionally feminine in a particularly submissive Japanese sort of way, and, of course, she has the aforementioned large boobs. There's nothing wrong with any part of that argument individually, right? There's nothing wrong with a character being inspired by another character or driven by wanting a romantic relationship. There's nothing wrong with losing fights all the time. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be a housewife. It's just that when you look at all these disparate parts together, it starts to paint a picture of a very typical cliche of a submissive woman who only exists to serve the men in her life, presented in a very unironic way. It's not ideal. I think the case for Hinata being an unfeminist character is pretty solid. But I'm gonna try and debunk it anyway, because Hinata's my hero and she taught me to fight all your battles even if you know you can't win. Let's just go through these one by one, shall we? Sure, it's all the points together that make the character unfeminist, but if I simply debunk all of them, then I win, right? Let's go with that. Because while I cannot dispute that Kishimoto holds some aggressive views about women, I genuinely don't think he's a misogynist, especially when you compare him to some of his contemporaries, and I think he should get some credit for that. Something which I really appreciate about Naruto, and one of the reasons I think it was such a successful crossover anime, is that it doesn't do all of that annoying fan service stuff with its female characters all the time. The anime injects more of it, but the manga is shockingly unsexualized compared to some of its peers. Especially the only other anime I've sunk significant time into, Bleach. Okay, I realize how ridiculous that sounds, considering that this is the show that opens with Naruto doing the sexy jutsu, but I genuinely think there is a difference between this, which is a joke at the expense of the pervy adult men in the show, and this, which is just because the author thinks it's hot. Also, this character was a toddler 5 minutes ago. God, Bleach gets so uncomfortable sometimes. Am I stretching all semblance of credibility by arguing that the sexy jutsu is an elaborate parody of Shonen's general approach to fan service? Well, screw it, we're in it now. It's a prank. Naruto is making fun of people for being so easily distracted by the sight of a naked woman. Whereas Bleach is just like, hey, here's a naked woman for you to stare at, you kinky little bastard. None of the women in Naruto dress like this, right? They dress like human beings. Even Tsunade, which is as close as Naruto gets to this sort of thing, looks extremely modest in comparison to some of Bleach's designs. She's still dressed like the way a human would dress, she just happens to have large boobs. She's also, 56, which, I don't know, I think it does make a difference. Sexualization of a character in Naruto always feels like a personal choice, which is the difference. Ino wants to look hot, that's her prerogative, so dressing a little more provocatively is a character-driven decision. Whereas in Bleach, the way female characters dress is completely untied to their actual personalities a lot of the time. The aforementioned toddler turned sexy lady still has the personality of a toddler. Look, I really didn't intend to go in on Bleach this much. I loved Bleach as a 14-year-old because I was a kinky little bastard. I was exactly the target audience, but by God is it awkward to go back to as an adult. Naruto has its issues, I would never say otherwise, but perspective, right? It was competing with Bleach and One Piece, it comes out looking pretty good in that comparison. Not to harp on about the big boobs thing again, but if that's all I cared about in the character, then why the hell would I watch Naruto of all things? Fan art, that's a different story. I will not deny that fan artists often take those elements and run with them, but, that's literally every female character ever. There's no shortage of perverts online. If we're gauging the show itself, then Hinata is almost always dressed in a deliberately unsexualized way. She wears big baggy jackets and long flowy skirts. She's dressed in the way you'd expect a character with anxiety and self-image issues to dress. The most provocative her outfit ever gets is her mission outfit in the last, but this is a change that's character-driven. It comes after an increase in her own confidence and a shift in her attitude from passive to actively trying to form a relationship with Naruto. There's a meaner argument that comes after that this is still sexualization, just a kind of creepier one that focuses on a character's innocence and shyness as the desirable trait, but I don't know why you would make that argument except to be mean. One of the reasons that Hinata's arc was so important to me growing up is that her shyness is never presented as a desirable trait, it's a genuine character flaw, and she's not able to be her true self until she's mastered it. By the time she's become an adult, it's completely gone. It doesn't make her more attractive, it does the opposite. Naruto would never be able to love her if she couldn't express herself clearly and be herself, not a shy wreck. Towards the end of the show, she thinks about how she wants to stand next to Naruto and hold his hand, and she needs to be stronger to do it. She doesn't mean stronger in the sense of battle power, she means inner strength. The power to look him in the eyes and talk to him without fear or anxiety. To just be who she is, proudly and truly. Which I suppose brings us on to our next point, that her entire character arc revolves around her crush on a boy.
Kyle, why are you doing this?
Doing what?
You're fighting a battle that nobody is forcing you to fight.
Oh, aren't they? I'm a 25-year-old man sitting in my bed reading fluffy fan fiction for tween girls. I'm a creep, I'm no better than the big tit anime boys, I'm just more kawaii about it, which is worse because at least they're engaging in entertainment that's meant for adults.
You said it yourself earlier, there's nothing inherently wrong with shipping.
Yeah, well then why does everyone make fun of it then? This is a hard one to debunk because it just is true and there's no real way around that. It didn't have to be true, they could have focused more on her family drama, but they didn't. After the time skip, it's all Naruto all the time. So instead of attacking the conclusion, let's attack the premise. Is this actually a problem? Because if it's a problem that someone's character arc is entirely centered around another character and their affections, let me tell you about my friend Gaara.
Watching Naruto Uzumaki has brought me clarity. Until I met him, my ties to others brought only pain. With my head held high, I stood as his equal. And step by step, I aimed for the day when I could be acknowledged as his friend. But then, a single shinobi from the Hidden Leaf Village stopped me. I was his enemy, yet still he cried for me. And he called me his friend, even though we had battled.
The show is named Naruto. Of course a lot of the character stories are going to be centered on him. There's a pretty funny filler episode where Kiba nearly has a mental breakdown as he comes to terms with the fact that Naruto has become his role model. I just singled out Gaara specifically because people often credit him as having one of the best character arcs in the series, and the entire time he will just not shut up about how it's all thanks to Naruto. The only difference is the romantic aspects of Hinata's story, or not even that depending on who you ask. I worry that in our quest for strong female characters, we've kind of demonized love as a motivation a little bit. If in real life someone told you that their life goal was to get married and start a family, I seriously don't think you'd find that all that weird, right? But in fiction, it's considered a weak character motivation because of a long history of one-note female characters who transparently only exist to be the love interest of the main character. But it's not an inherently weak character motivation, it's just usually written badly. Does Hinata actually fall into the archetype of a one-note love interest? I mean, obviously I don't think so. But if we take Kishimoto at face value, then he didn't even plan for them to get together until about halfway through the series, which... yeah, that tracks. That would explain why all of her plot threads feel abandoned after the halfway point. Even if the crush on Naruto is present from the beginning, love interest is not the foundation of the character. Crippling social anxiety and self-doubt are the foundation of the character. You can try and make a she changes herself for a man argument, but I think that's false. She changes herself for herself first and foremost. Naruto is a motivation, I won't deny that, but she's not trying to turn herself into a girl that she thinks Naruto will like. She's trying to turn herself into a better version of herself and just kind of hopes Naruto will be into that. And I suppose that's an important thing to discuss too. What actually is her personality beyond being depressed and shy? Beyond the anxiety issues, Hinata is generally defined as being kind and gentle. And then people will sort of leave that hanging as a condemnation of her lacking a solid personality, but we can expand on that. Yes, that is kind of a cliche trope about submissive women, but Hinata isn't actually the one in Naruto's friend group defined by kindness and gentleness. That's Choji. Choji's the kid who tries to help butterflies fly away. Ironically, the trait that comes to define Hinata the most as the series goes on is bravery, which sure, all of the characters have that warrior bravery, right? But generally the story does call out Hinata's in particular, especially towards the end of the war arc. Hinata, of all people, ends up giving a big rousing speech to inspire everyone. At the core of her character is a contradiction, which I think is quite compelling. She's gentle and non-confrontational, while also being a ninja, a warrior for a living. If she's not a fan of fighting, then why is she training to become a professional fighter? And I think the answer is ultimately just to prove that she can. Prove it to herself, mainly. We can add a surprising stubbornness to her list of character traits.
I had no idea that Hinata's as tough as she is.
She is a lot like you.
Yeah, what he said. She's got that indomitable shonen protagonist spirit. Not quite as strongly as Naruto, obviously, but she's got the spark. See, I don't actually think Kishimoto's problem is writing strong female characters. I think all of his female characters are equally as vivid as their male counterparts. Okay, maybe not all of his female characters, but the vast majority of them. That's why they have such rabid fan bases, right? Kishimoto's problem is that once he's made these characters, he just doesn't quite know what to do with them, and so he ends up just slotting them into typical gender roles. Rather than being bad at writing women, what I get from Naruto is a discomfort in writing women. Like, he can do it, but he would prefer not to. So, are you buying any of this yet? How's my unhinged ramble to protect this fictional lady going? Yeah, I don't think I am. I mean, sure, I can debunk all the feminist talking points that I want, but feminist critique isn't really about individual characters, right? It's about patterns. It's not an issue that Hinata is primarily driven by wanting a romantic relationship. It's a problem that every female character in Naruto is primarily driven by that. And isn't discomfort in writing female characters just the same thing as being bad at it? What am I actually trying to say there? That kind of sounds like making up some bullshit excuses to me. I'm not done yet. What else have we got? Always losing fights to motivate Naruto. I actually think this is an interesting talking point because it's entirely centered on the framing of the narrative. Hinata has two important fights in the series that really matter, and in both of them, she's fighting against an opponent who's so much stronger than her that she doesn't have a hope in hell of winning. Neji in pain. However, I'm going to hit you with a hot take here. I think that Kishimoto, the man who wrote Naruto, is a good writer. And I think that both of these fights do a really interesting job of showing a character winning while still technically losing. In terms of showing her actual fighting power, the series really screwed Hinata over. Being a Hyuga trained in their special gentle fist technique, she could have handily beaten like at least 70% of the contestants at the preliminaries. Assuming Naruto cheered her on, but he probably would. Neji isn't worst case scenario. I mean, I really don't think she'd last too long against Gaara, but anyone except Gaara would have lost to Neji. Hinata's one of the only people there who could even try to fight him because she knows all his moves. Having Hinata's first ever on-screen fight be against a prodigy who handily wins doesn't exactly set her up as a great warrior. But, you know, she is, even if we don't see it much in the text. All of Naruto's friends, right from the start, are considered to be notably talented within the universe. The thing about the Neji fight, though, is it's not really about winning. The fact that she tried it all and didn't immediately give up is the victory. That's why, despite nearly dying, Hinata comes out of that fight looking like a champion and Neji like a petulant child. Because the other important thing this fight does in the story is establish Neji as Naruto's first personal antagonist, more so than even Sasuke. He really wants to beat Neji after this fight. He swears a blood oath, for God's sake. It's not just because he beat up an innocent girl, it's because Naruto saw himself in Hinata, recognizing that like him, she's a failure too, and she's just trying to prove herself the same way he is. Narratively, it's just a very efficient fight. It gives Hinata an important moment of growth as a character, while at the same time setting up Neji as a guy you really want to see Naruto punch, despite how impossible that may seem. Pain is an extension of the same idea. First of all, she reveals what is, in my opinion, one of the coolest looking abilities in the entire series. She just turned her fists into lions, that's badass. At least I assume it is, but we never in the entire series see her hit someone with it. There's that weird framing again. But more importantly, if her fight against Neji is where she makes her first significant stride to getting over her anxiety and lack of self-worth, confronting pain is where she moves past it entirely. Coming to fight pain is stupid and practically suicidal, but she does it anyway. As she says to Naruto, she's just being selfish. And an entirely selfish self-sacrifice is such interesting character development to me. She's not here because she genuinely thinks she can win. She's just here to prove to herself that she's not scared anymore, that she's willing to put her life on the line in this way, to confess her true feelings. Yeah, but she still lost so that Naruto could go on a big rampage. She got fridged, she just happened not to die. And here's a fun trivia fact for you. In the entirety of the manga, there is not a single time when a female beats a male character in a one-on-one fight. There's always some sort of outlier or reason why it doesn't really count. The only time a woman can win is if she's fighting another woman. But there's plenty of characters they could beat, they just don't happen in the story. Yeah, they don't happen in the story. That's why it's a sexist trope. Women being injured or killed purely to motivate the men in their lives into action. It subconsciously reinforces the idea that women are inferior to men, just the same way that them always losing the fights does. Or how about the fact that when Sakura punches one of her friends, that's a funny joke, but when Sasuke does it, that's a sign he's gone off the deep end. It enforces this idea that women can't be a real threat to men. Even if the text suggests that this is all just a series of unfortunate coincidences, that's not what the audience takes away from it. You know that. But this is different. She's different. No, she isn't. She's not real. And Musashi Kishimoto doesn't get extra brownie points just because you've developed an emotional attachment to a character that, whether intentionally or not, is written in a sexist way. He had infinite opportunities to write her winning a fight. He's the writer. But he didn't do that. And you have to include that as part of your analysis, not just for Hinata, but for all of his female characters. Why are you saying this? Why aren't you? You're trying to be a credible media critic and here you are twisting arguments and changing things. To what? Win arguments against teenagers on Tumblr because they insulted your precious waifu? Oh, just fuck off, will you? I can't fuck off. We're both the same person. You know, I really hate that word.
What word?
Waifu. Even just saying it makes me uncomfortable. The concept of obsessing over these fictional characters, especially in the weird, cutesy, childish way that these characters are usually portrayed as, which just make the romantic undertones of the whole concept so uncomfortable. It creeps me out.
There's no wrong way to engage with art, and you're changing the subject again. You're lashing out, throwing insults at other people when they have nothing to do with what's really going on. What is it, Kyle? What are you so afraid of?
Myself. Okay, hang on. Just... what point do you reckon that a video essay has gone completely off the rails? It's water. Jesus didn't come along and turn me into wine, the prick. What do you think of my Hinata statue, by the way? I got it for this video, but in the other shot, it's just like in the background out of frame, which made me feel like I wasted my money, but it's actually very nice quality, and I immediately understand why people collect them and kind of want more, but they're quite big, so I don't think I can justify doing that. Okay, so I feel like maybe I owe you some sort of explanation. See, the reason I started working on this video in the first place is because a few weeks ago I was playing some Overwatch with my friends, and one of them, knowing that I'd been rewatching Naruto, asked the most obvious question ever. Who's your favourite character? Hinata. Didn't even have to think about it. It came to me in 1 second. It was the most obvious thing ever. But I couldn't fucking say it. I dodged that question like a motherfucker. Oh, you know, there's just so many good characters to choose from. I couldn't possibly pick. Sorry, apparently I get sweary when I'm copying ContraPoints. I'm emulating ContraPoints. Why couldn't I just say Hinata? I've known these guys my entire life. I know they're not going to make fun of me. It's not even a controversial pick. So why couldn't I say it? I'm actually still struggling to say it out loud right now. Hinata. It makes me feel uncomfortable. As it turns out, talking about Hinata is picking at the deepest, darkest parts of my anxiety. The parts that I thought I was long done away with. One of my favourite podcasts right now is a podcast called Mum Can't Cook. It's a podcast where these two English guys review DCOMs, or Disney Channel original movies. And in their episode on the movie Eddie's $1 Million Cook-Off, they had a conversation at the beginning that I haven't been able to get out of my head the entire time I've been working on this video.
Like, there are scenes in this that really remind me of, like, the playground when I was at school, and just that vibe of everyone watching everyone else like a hawk.
Yeah.
Any
sign of weakness.
Any sign of weakness, any sign of doing something that is
slightly unusual.
Yeah, slightly unusual, slightly deviates from society's prescription of what masculinity is. And then you'd be like, bam, I've got it. Everyone, Brian had a choice of 3 drinks in the vending machine and he chose the purple one.
Oh my god. Everybody swarm and kill him.
Is this right? Swarm and kill him. And it wasn't so much like a hatred of Brian or a hatred of purple drinks. It was that, like, that's how you scored a point.
Well, if it was happening to Brian, it wasn't happening to you.
Yes, so, yes, yeah. I think that's it.
And yeah, that is it. It's toxic masculinity. Of course it is. I don't know why it took me so long to figure that one out. I started reading Naruto when I was still in that social battleground, and I started reading Naruhina fanfiction when I was still in that social battleground. And if I had shown any sign of weakness, even in the comfy confines of the comic and manga club the librarian had set up, I would have been Brianed. That's not what a boy is supposed to enjoy about manga. A boy is supposed to enjoy the cool fights and the sexy naked ladies. You're not supposed to enjoy the shy female side character who doesn't do much, and her mushy love story. What are you, some kind of gay? I don't agree with a single part of that sentence. There's no part of a manga that a boy is supposed to enjoy. There's nothing wrong with a boy enjoying romance. Doing so doesn't make you gay, and being gay isn't an insult worth considering in the first place. I'm also an adult now and don't need to concern myself with the thoughts of people who think otherwise. But some part of my brain hidden deep away has been conditioned from when I was 12 to think of Hinata Hyuga as a taboo subject that I'm not supposed to talk about. Oh god, okay. You wouldn't believe it, but sitting like this isn't actually the most comfortable thing ever. Now I'm more embarrassed about being embarrassed, quite frankly. I mean, really, I shipped the main character with his wife. Wow, so bold and daring and controversial. Well, let me be very clear about something. I don't ship the main character with his wife. I ship his wife with the main character. I'm a Hinata guest at the wedding. I also know exactly why I'm being so defensive of Hinata. It's because she's a cute sad girl who needs a hug. This kind of character is almost engineered to invoke that kind of feeling. It's a well-documented thing. And that's not inherently different than the emotions that other characters are supposed to invoke, be it inspiration or laughter from Naruto or anger from Sasuke. But it feels different. It feels like some sort of weakness to admit that that sort of thing works on you. You want to know who I really fear? I fear him. Not him specifically, although I do fear becoming the face of a subculture that everyone hates, but no, I fear what he represents. The neckbeard, a social pariah obsessed with anime and boobs despite never touching any real ones, and with this weird defensive attitude of women, but only if they, match his very specific ideas of what women should be, usually inspired by anime. Give me 50 more pounds and some more skincare and I basically become this guy, right? No, of course not. That's not how that works. And even my own fear of that is based on my own internal biases and judgmental attitudes. My dislike of waifu culture is rooted in my own deep personal investment in a cute anime girl. I'm projecting, and as a result, I end up doing the exact same thing I was getting mad at Tumblr for doing earlier, morally justifying my arguments, trying to reframe it as some sort of secret win for feminism, instead of just accepting the fact that I can like a character who's written in a somewhat sexist way, and that's fine, actually. I don't want to, date her. I am her. That's the through line of the video, yeah. So I guess I want to date Naruto. I'll just join the back of the queue. At the end of the day, my passion is mushy, gooey love stories. I know logically that I have no reason to be ashamed of that, but shame is one of the least logical emotions we have. Totally useless, that guy. So let's just be away with him, shall we? And let's talk about a kind of terribly written love story that happens to bring me great joy.
The Last is a movie made for me specifically. I don't care what you think about it. I love this movie so much. It's one of my favourite things in the entire Naruto series. It's also a huge mess, but I just don't care. It makes me cry every time I watch it. And to this day, I'm still absolutely baffled that it exists at all. What the hell is this lovey-dovey teen princess romance novel of a movie doing at the end of my punchy sad boy anime? The overarching plot and the villain and the fate of the world honestly don't matter at all. They're all just a framework to the most sincere wish fulfillment of a whirlwind romance you've ever seen. At least it's wish fulfillment if you view Hinata as the main character, which she basically is for most of the movie. At the very least, she's bumped up to dual protagonist role alongside Naruto. I have to give credit where it's due, because the writers of the movie had a real challenge on their hands with the way things are standing between Naruto and Hinata by the end of the series. She confessed her love in a massive, grandiose display, and Naruto didn't even react to it, at all. He didn't reject her, he didn't accept her, he didn't even talk to her about it or to anyone about it. It's almost as if he didn't even notice it happened.
Because I love you. I always will.
Not really a lot of room for interpretation in that statement, but that's because that's not actually what she said. What she actually said was,
私はナルト君が大好きだから。
Oh, hey. I didn't murder this framing device yet. Let's talk more about some issues with translation. I'm going to preface this with my previous claim that I don't speak Japanese, but from what I can understand, the direct translation of what she just said there isn't actually I love you, at least not in the way we would understand that phrase. The Japanese language does not express romantic love in the same way that the English language does. Going all in and using the Japanese word for I love you, which is ashiteru, would be considered extremely weird. It's the sort of thing you would only see on, your wedding day. Instead, what Hinata said in that scene was daisuki, which more directly translates to I really like you, which of course can still be used as a romantic confession, and obviously she intended it that way, but it's more easy to see how Naruto could potentially misinterpret it as you're my best friend, Naruto. This is one of those times when the English translators were just completely screwed, because if she had jumped down there and said, I really like you, Naruto, that would have seemed ridiculous and silly, because this is obviously the time for a romantic confession, and that's obviously what she meant in the original Japanese. In the English language, we are not shy about using the word love. I love this couch. It's obviously what she would say in that scenario. But because in English, I love you said in a scenario like this could only possibly be interpreted as a romantic confession, Naruto just comes across as the biggest idiot on the planet for not realising that Hinata is in love with him. Even in the manga or the English subtitles, this problem still exists. The only way you could actually understand this confusion is if you speak Japanese. It's an untranslatable problem. And of course, when they were first translating the manga when it came out, they didn't realise that Naruto wasn't going to get it, so they just translated it to the most direct thing in English that she would have said. If you've ever wondered why you get those weebs and fan translations talking about how much more beautiful the Japanese language is, this sort of thing is why. English is a very blunt language on the global scene. It's pretty easy to translate stuff between English and French, because English and French both have the same root language, Ancient Latin. They both use the same alphabet and the same sentence structure. Your only real issue is grammar.
Not only does Japanese not have the same alphabet, the entire way words are constructed in the first place is fundamentally different. Japanese is based in compound words, kanji, that when written together in different ways form different words. It's an entirely different basis for the entire language that fundamentally changes everything. And because of that, direct translation is very often completely impossible. That doesn't mean we shouldn't still try and do it. I think it would be very silly if everyone had to learn Japanese in order to enjoy anime. But this is just the perfect example of even if you're relying on a direct English translation, there are going to be fundamental differences with the original text that can cause issues sometimes. Of course, the context of this confession coming down to try and save him from an impossibly strong foe still should have probably suggested that she meant more than "you're a really good friend." Even in Japanese, Naruto's still pretty dense for that one. So to solve this, the movie makes a couple of pretty big swings, which are all controversial, but I think they managed to pull off. First is the biggest one. According to the movie, Naruto just has no idea what romantic love actually is.
He can be so dense sometimes. Maybe he doesn't even know what love really is.
What do you mean?
He doesn't know the difference between the love of sweets, like dumplings, and real romantic love.
What? They're not the same kind of thing?
Which might sound insane, but considering that the only adults in his life are open perverts or closet perverts, and none of them are in romantic relationships, discounting, of course, whatever the hell we call what's going on between Kakashi and Guy, I think this kind of sort of works. It does rob Naruto of a bit of his emotional maturity, but it's also an explanation for how he had absolutely no reaction to this. And it turns the long-running joke of his total obliviousness to Hinata's crush on him into an actual personality trait, which I think is clever. It also serves the double punch of retroactively nullifying his infatuation with Sakura, that he was basically acting out what he thought being in love with someone was. Which, listen, if you are a Naruto Sakura shipper, I'm sorry, that must be a rough one to take, I bet. I think the way Sakura puts it is pretty weak, that he only did it as a way to compete with Sasuke. I think that's silly, but I really don't mind the idea in spirit, that he was just doing what he thought boys ought to do and hadn't actually put any thought into why. He thinks Sakura is pretty, so he must be in love with her. Which intermingles with the third big swing, that Naruto has always had romantic feelings for Hinata. He just didn't realise that. And listen, as a long-time shipper before the movie had even come out, I was pretty happy to just roll with that, but I will acknowledge that the movie could have done a better job of communicating that. This is what the infamous Genjutsu bubble scene is trying to convey, and it only really conveys Naruto's lack of understanding, not so much his own feelings.
Oh, but Naruto shouldn't have been able to be caught in a Genjutsu because he's a perfect Genjutsu. Shut the fuck up. I do not give a shit. Open your heart to magic and whimsy for once in your miserable fucking life. Too much? Maybe a little bit too much. This water is delicious.
I guess this does require some explanation. Hinata's sister has been kidnapped by a man who lives on the moon, and on their way to the moon to rescue her, the team gets caught in a memory dream trap. You follow all that along clearly, all very reasonable stuff I just said. While in the memory dream trap, a scarf that Hinata was making for Naruto as a gift wraps around him and her memories start to interlink with his. This does a perfectly fine job of showing Naruto that Hinata actually loves him and what that actually means. But what it doesn't really show is that Naruto feels the same way.
You really have a thing for her.
Yeah, of course I do. I really love Hinata, you know?
Okay, yes, he literally says it right there, but in context it's easier to read this as him figuring out what love is via a language mix-up rather than as a literal love confession. And it's not like there aren't scenes they could show to back up this idea. This one in particular comes to mind when Hinata was able to inspire him before his fight with Neji. Or, you know, the part where they hold hands before fighting God.
Just because Hinata's here doesn't mean you have to act tough, Naruto.
See, Kiba's got my back. I take back everything I ever said about you, Kiba. You do deserve to be Hokage. If you were already watching the show actively hunting for clues that Naruto liked Hinata, then the movie makes perfect sense. If you were some kind of weirdo and not doing that, then the movie doesn't do itself any favours. The movie takes a fairy tale approach to love. Love is self-evident. It doesn't need explanation because it defies rational explanation anyway. In fact, it takes one fairy tale in particular and makes it the emotional centre of the movie. The red string of fate. In Japanese folklore, the red string of fate is an invisible red string that binds two people together. It's similar to what we'd call soulmates, only there's a physical representation of the ties that bind. The ties are literal. There is one version of the myth in particular that's extremely relevant to the last. A girl confesses her love to a boy, but he rejects her and she runs away into the night. She meets the matchmaking god of the moon, who tells her that she's still bound to this boy by the red string of fate. Later in life, she meets a man and the two are to be married. He expresses his regret at rejecting a girl so harshly when he was younger. They realise that she was the girl and he asks for her forgiveness, which he happily gives. The movie is essentially a retelling of this myth with a classic shonen twist because we need a big fight at the end. The man on the moon isn't just a matchmaker, he wants the girl all to himself. It turns out it's not the boy that rejects the girl, but the girl that rejects the boy. And the red string of fate isn't a literal string, but rather a homemade red scarf. That's not to say the movie is all love and fairy tales. The movie serves as the perfect culmination to Hinata's arc. She has the thing she's always wanted since the beginning of the series. Naruto has just reciprocated her love. After having some adorable flirty adventures during the day, Naruto even gets his, "oh shit, I'm in love" moment. But given what she's always wanted, she rejects it and potentially ruins that relationship forever in order to rescue her sister and save the world. She is more than her love of Naruto, even if Naruto still ends up saving the day because, we're not escaping that reflexive sexism anytime soon. The fact that she was willing to go that far is the point. She's fully become the person she was trying to be when she first fought Neji. Strong, brave, never giving up and never running away. And now, finally she can be happy as well.
The movie is total Shy Kid wish fulfillment. It's the fantasy that your crush will finally notice you and that really, they had a crush on you the whole time as well. I understand what it's doing, but I'm still eating it up because it's cute and it's cathartic and it brings me joy. To me, anxiety and romance are always going to be linked. If you think it's hard to talk to your crush normally, try doing it with an anxiety disorder. It feels like a physical struggle just to be near them. They feel like they're radiating some sort of heat that's damaging you, let alone trying to say hello to them or, God forbid, have an actual conversation. And of course, I am talking from personal experience again. When I was in secondary school, there was this girl. There's always a this girl, isn't there? And I thought she was the prettiest girl in the entire world. She was kind too. She was always very nice to me. I would consider her to be my first ever major crush. And I maintained that for a good few years. But I never did manage to pluck up the confidence to actually go and talk to her. I tried plenty of times, or rather, I thought about trying plenty of times, but I never managed it. I always got too stressed over it. I could barely even look at her, to be honest. I remember in one class we were supposed to be sat next to each other, which both terrified and excited me. But then, because she's nice, she traded with someone in the back so they could see the board better. Which sounds like the sort of fake drama that should only happen in movies, right? There was other things going on too. For a long time my parents were trying to move here to Canada, which we eventually did just after my 14th birthday. So I knew that there was already very little chance of being in a relationship with this girl, but at that point the chances were zero. But I still couldn't go and talk to her, because you would think that would make her easier to talk to, but no, I still couldn't even approach her. That was until the very last day that I was at school. There was some kind of charity sale going on, and this girl was working at one of the stands selling beaded bracelets. And so I forced myself to go up and talk to her. There was no chance of it being a relationship anymore. I was leaving the country forever in 2 days, but it was a personal challenge. I would go up, I would say hello, I would smile at her, and I would buy a stupid bead bracelet. I waited until there was no line, and I went up, and I did it, and I felt like I was going to die. I sputtered over all of my words. I could barely speak. I cut that exchange off way faster than I should have, but I did it, and I even had a memento to prove it. I would show it to you now, but I lost that thing like 10 years ago. It was a shitty £2 bead bracelet. It wasn't made for the long haul. Still, it remains a core memory of mine. One of the first times I truly fought back against my anxiety. Faced one of my biggest fears. Two of my biggest fears. Talking to a cute girl and a cashier. And I'll tell you exactly what I was thinking of in that moment. I was thinking of Hinata giving that little tub of healing cream to Naruto. There's a reason the movie gives this scene just as much attention as the actual love confession. It's because, honestly, this was harder than the love confession. That was driven by adrenaline. This is just pure, sheer willpower. And she was trembling, and she was sweating, and she could barely get the words out at all, but she fucking did it, man, and so did I. No amount of sexist writing or online weirdos calling me a slave apologist will ever take away how meaningful that was to me.
Naruto! What's this?
It's a healing ointment.
For me? What for?
Take it, Naruto. Go ahead.
You want to know the real reason this video is a terrible idea? Because of how inherently sincere it is. The internet, for as long as I can remember, has been well and truly irony poisoned. Sincerity, especially on the level that I've displayed in this video, is considered cringe. And cringe is the worst thing you can possibly post. Nobody wants to be the next Leave Britney Alone. Genuine displays of emotion like that make people uncomfortable, or worse yet, they make you a target. In a way, YouTube isn't that much different from high school. Everyone's always looking for any sign of weakness, any chance to score a point. I try and push back against that impulse. I try and be as sincere as possible about the things that I enjoy. But I am, to my core, a cynical old bastard. Victor McDade is my spirit animal, okay? Nobody's gonna get that reference. Watch Still Game. You won't get it, but watch it anyway. If you ever want to know what Scotland is actually like, watch Still Game.
Back off, ya spooky bitch! Come on, shut your eyes.
I think this is why earnestly engaging with shipping communities makes me so uncomfortable. Shipping is a concept that requires total sincerity. You can't really ironically ship two people. It's all or nothing, and that level of sincerity kind of freaks me out because I'm so not used to it. And what has this video been if not a massive freak out about my own inability to deal with my own emotional baggage? But there is something, a piece of life advice that I think we could all do with hearing sometimes. As a gay love confession Neopet once quoted, "Don't kill the part of you that's cringe. Kill the part of you that cringes." Hinata Hyuga is an important character to me on many levels. She was my hero for dealing with and overcoming my own social anxiety issues, my inspiration for gathering enough courage to go up and talk to my crush, and my muse for exploring my own options with creative writing. Is she the best written character in all of Naruto? Absolutely not. I'm still rooting for her to win a fight one of these days. But I will not be silenced or ashamed of my own sincerity anymore, and that's why Hinata Hyuga is my favourite character in Naruto. So maybe I am a white-knighting, trilby-tipping neckbeard obsessed with my precious anime waifu. And tell me, what's wrong with that exactly?